Here we go.
All right. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Are we who's writing? Did we already establish that?
Nope.
Okay, I can write.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
Are you okay writing, Catherine?
Yeah, I'm writing. Which what did you guys think of the readings?
I thought
book did you guys
Rule.
I read rules.
Did anyone read Wonder?
I read Wonder.
Okay.
Who read Wonder?
Me.
Hey, Nicole.
Oh, sorry, your faces aren't there. So I can just hear voices.
I don't know. I really liked the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What
Do you
was
guys-
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, do you guys think it because we read that one article on the special or the disability books, literature, what to look for and what not to look for or in books and stuff. Do you guys think that it fit?
Did
Like,
someone start saying? Oh, I think for rules, because the author Cynthia Lord, she has 2 kids and one of them has autism, and so obviously that was great. But the character that she based Jason on, Jason is a guy in a wheelchair who can't talk verbally and points at cards. She was inspired to write that character when she saw a guy like him in a waiting room, and from what I read, that was that was about it, and she just kind of came up with the rest. And so I don't know if the way that someone with a physical disability was portrayed in the most authentic way.
But I mean, that is true. She doesn't have personal experience with that type of disability. But I do think the way his character was portrayed, I think, was really good. It never made him independent. It made him this complex character and not someone just she brushes over. So I guess in that sense, yeah, she's not exactly authentic, but I don't think it was a bad thing that she did that.
Yeah.
But I'm more forgiving in that kind of sense. But
how is David portrayed? David, that's right, the autistic brother.
Okay, so that was one character that I thought was kind of this is kind of basing off of the author's son, but he's not seen, he hasn't seen as independent, but I also don't know his age, and my guess is that he's younger because I think she's the older sister, I'm pretty sure. So it's there's kind of that balance of well, he may not be portrayed this way, but I think it's also because of his age in the book. So I wasn't sure about that. What do you guys think?
Oh, I think because it was from the older sister's point of view, I guess she was more inclined to describe him as, the one who's always needing to be babysat, who always needs to be taken care of. And yeah. But I really liked the character David. He was just really endearing, and you get to know him, and by the end of the book you start to really like him.
Yeah, when I was writing the post, I kind of reevaluated the book, and I didn't really feel it was because 2 of the big things that stood out to me on what to avoid was making people that are friends or whatever with people with disabilities the hero or extra good for helping them, and then trying to provoke pity or sorrow for the people that have disabilities in the book. I didn't really feel that was happening, so that was a big thing that I thought was good about the book, because I feel like that's like a really big like stereotype kind of, or like like thought people have when like if someone does Special Olympics and helps out and volunteers or like works with kids with special needs, like they're always like, oh my gosh, you have the biggest heart, like how can you do that, like, you know, I don't know. I thought it was good. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing about Wonder that I was going back and forth on. I felt that in the end it did a really good job of portraying like the friends, because I don't know if you guys were able to read the summary at all, but it's basically about this boy who starts middle school after being homeschooled, and he has a facial like physical disability. Like he's had about, he said like 27 surgeries, and so he has this pretty severe like sort of like deformation on his face, and people treat him differently because of that. And like reading the book, sometimes I would get that feeling that they're sort of making the people that do sit with him at lunch the heroes. But I also think that there was enough character development in those characters where the book then could be used as a mirror or a window for allies of disability. So, because there was one boy who went through sort of the personal conflict that a lot of kids go through when befriending a person with disabilities, where he sort of had to choose between being cool or being this kid's friend. And I think that that's something that a lot of kids go through. And so while it might get on the border of sort of making the friends the heroes because they're being friends with a disabled person, I think that it was also really good to show his development and thought process.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of makes me think of the videos that we watched about inclusion in schools. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I must have missed that one because I didn't. I just saw Carly's videos and then like the language video. Like I don't know what happened. I don't know if I missed that one or there was one that didn't work.
Was it the movie for the trailer?
Yeah, including Samuel.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which, okay, didn't we watch that movie for SPED?
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, that sounds really, I couldn't fully remember like everything from the movie, but I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure I've seen that.
What did you think about the movie?
That's a good movie. One thing I liked
good.
about it in the trailer is that the kids don't, when they describe Sam, they don't focus on his disability. They're not like, oh, Sam's my friend who's in a wheelchair. They were saying things like his favorite color is yellow, and they were treating him like every other classmate because that's what he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I really liked the Carly's Cafe video. I thought that was like a really good, like, kind of way for us to understand what it's like for someone who has autism, and like it's from someone who experiences it, and like kind of help director or whatever. And and then I really liked her like response to when she was on like Doctors. I really like what about this, I think it's stemming, whatever it's called, and like she's like, well, don't you guys all have a way that you do that too? Like ours just made like different, but like you guys draw on a piece of paper. And I was like, that's so true. Like I was like, that's actually like really cool. Like but you know, like in a way too that we're all kind of like the same type of people or whatever. Like that was really good.
Yeah, it's really interesting what's not socially acceptable and what is socially acceptable, and how that really changes how we view people. As soon as they're not following those rules, we start to get weirded out.
It's weird how like what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable like changes over time. So I wonder if like someday that will be acceptable, or if it will always be considered like not the norm.
Well, I think that kind of rings to with like rules, right? Like the whole book like she's like writing down these rules for like her brother, and I think it's her trying to make sense of like the world too, and like yeah, there's all these different things that and then she's like when it was hard to distinguish for him, like she's like there's like complicated rules where it's like it's okay to do this but not in this situation, like, and I think that's totally something to like changes over time, and I think there are some too that like the social rules or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting how like
I guess as teachers, that'll be a big thing for us to communicate that to students and get them thinking about, what's socially acceptable and what's not, and how we act towards people who follow those rules or not.
That's one thing I liked about Wonder is it was very relatable in the sense that all of the characters had enough depth to where it could really be used for it could really be used as a mirror for really anyone who's gone through middle school. And this one book happens to focus on a kid with a disability, but there's also his friends and his classmates and his bullies, and it's a very typical high school scenario.
Yeah.
And it's actually being made into a movie.
Yeah, I saw the trailer for it.
With like Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson are the mom and dad, and it's cool because it goes into their perspective too of what it's like to be a parent of a student with a disability.
Yeah, I liked how I guess it just like every book that's written from like a different perspective, like our book is written from the sisters' perspective. Like if you read a book by Carly, it'd be a totally different book, even if it's the same story. Like
she has written a book.
But I'm saying like if she wrote rules, like say she wrote the exact same story but from her perspective or something, like they'd be the totally two different books. Like
well, that kind of sorry.
I was gonna say I wonder why the author chose to write it from the sister's perspective rather than David's or the other boy.
I remember reading a book, and she actually like Joy has it like on one of the like modules, and it's called Out of My Mind, and it's from a perspective of someone who I can't remember what disability she has, but she's like she's nonverbal, and I want to say it's cerebral palsy, but I could be wrong. And it's like written from like her perspective, and I don't know what connection like the author has, like I read like in middle school or whatever, but I remember it being like really like helpful to like kind of understand like possibly what they could be thinking, and they're just like another person, but they just kind of do things differently. Like so it's like going through her thoughts, and like when she's like talking to her classmates or whatever, she's like, oh, I really hope I'm not drooling right now, or like all these things, because she doesn't have a lot of control of like her body. And it made for my younger self, it made me realize like they're just another type of person. Like they're not like someone that we should necessarily like pity, but they're like they're just like us. They just and she was like really smart, and like was like in this it was like a decathlon or something like that. So I really like that kind of sense where it makes her really intelligent, and like this person that's like just like a really neat character. So
one thing I liked about Carly's videos was that it showed that autistic people, or people with autism, people on the spectrum, really anyone with a disability, they can have a productive life outside of their elementary school years, because everyone worries about like them not being able to have a job, or like a job that's actually something that they want to do. And I think that she's a good inspiration for the idea that you can really do whatever you want.
Yeah, I liked her point that there are a lot of people on the spectrum that are doing a lot of really important things and live really fulfilling lives, and that's definitely an asset-based view that can be rare.
Yeah.
There's
Mhm.
actually a show coming out called The Good Doctor. Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
It's about a guy who is on the spectrum and is a pediatric surgeon. And I want to find the trailer because it looks really good. Okay. Okay. And I'm interested to see how it, because it's a TV show, so it's going to like lengthen out.
I met
so
Sean Murphy when he was 14 years old. Sean! Just act like a normal human being. He was, and he still is, an extraordinary young man. Autism. Difficulty in communicating. He's high functioning, he's capable of living on his own. Difficulty in using language and abstract concepts. Does it sound like I'm describing a surgeon? He's breathing. He saved his life. Who are you?
I'm Dr. Sean Murphy. I'm a surgical resident at San Jose St. Bonaventure Hospital.
You thought that this board wouldn't have any doubts about hiring a surgeon diagnosed with autism. Justify your decision.
He also has savant syndrome, genius-level skills in several areas. He sees things.
It's his heart. Adam needs an echocardiogram.
No, behave yourself, or you'll be removed from the building.
The echo is normal. Sure. And analyzes things in ways that we can't even begin to understand.
Again? Again? There.
Looks normal to me.
It's not normal.
This kid was sprayed with glass shards. What if a piece of glass entered his bloodstream? Blood could be leaking behind the heart.
You were right.
Why were you rude to me when we first met and now you want to be my friend? Which time was it that you were pretending?
He's got a serious deficit. The child is alive today because of that deficit. And tomorrow one may be dead because of it. We hire Sean and we give hope to those people with limitations that those limitations are not what they think they are, that they do have a shot.
Never forget, you're the smart one. You can do anything.
Yeah, I think that it seems to really encompass a lot of the things that we've been talking about, and it looks really good.
One thing that
It just shows
kinda
how much
stuck out to me.
design.
What?
Oh, did someone say something? Oh, I was just gonna say one thing that stuck out to me was how in the article of qualities to look for, it said that the literature shouldn't portray all people with disabilities as like shouldn't try to compensate for the disability by giving them all like super crazy talents and like subhuman abilities. And so that was one thing that
Yeah, I was
I
thinking
saw.
about that when I was reading the article and like how it portrayed to the show, because I'd seen this trailer a while ago. But I mean, it's also, I think, more in like the details, especially the way that that one guy that was supporting him was talking. I think that was really interesting. And I mean, it's one of those things like you were saying, Catherine, I definitely have my reservations about the show, but I'm super excited for it because I definitely want to see I want to see how they take this.
Well, too, I think like it shows like with Carly having like she was very attuned to certain sounds. And I mean, maybe they were dramatizing like a little bit, but I also think that he was being attuned to that echocardiogram, and so he could hear that sound. And it could be where they make it into like it's more this like superhuman thing. But I also think that was kind of honoring that sense of or like how people have that kind of hearing. I don't know for sure, but it'd be interesting to see. But I do like, from what I saw, it seemed like, yeah, it's like challenging. He's like in a leading role. He's like independent. He's, you know, like, and yeah, this guy's like, they're like, oh, that deficit, and he's like, well, that deficit saved a life. Like, it's kind of like challenging, I think, what people tend to think of them, which I think, yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they take it.
I think it's interesting that they're even like making the show, because like not even that long ago, like 50 years ago, like everyone with any type of disability was put into like insane hospitals. Like they were considered insane, and like, so it's just like crazy now, 50 years later, it's like such a big step forward that they're even if it's not perfect, even if it does portray them in like not a perfect way, like everything that it's supposed to be, but the fact that they're trying to like putting shows like that into like media and stuff, like I think that's really cool. And like, of course, there's probably going to be problems with the show. There's probably going to be some type of, everyone's going to have a problem with everything.
Oh yeah.
It's cool that they are trying though. Like, it's just crazy like how far we have come. And
one muddy question that I might have, sorry for interrupting, you weren't done yet, but it might be, because I'm sort of going back and forth on, yeah, the show might make mistakes, but it's also getting people to talk about autism and what people with autism can really do. And so I'm wondering, with like media and literature, if bringing awareness has a positive enough effect to risk making some mistakes along the way.
You also have to keep in mind that it's Hollywood, and Hollywood like dramatizes everything, and like if it was like an actual real show, then Hollywood might think it might not do as well. So like, like even the reality shows are like not actually like 100% reality, so it'd be hard for Hollywood to like actually do it like correctly,
That's a good point. And I remember Joy saying at the very beginning of our class that there literally is no perfect piece of multicultural literature or media.
Yeah. So but I think that is a good question, Nicole.
People are having those conversations.
Yeah, and even the conversation of, I don't like how this is portrayed, brings the response, well, what about it do you think is wrong?
Right. So would we turn that into like a big idea, or do we want to keep that as a question?
Maybe a muddy question.
See what she thinks of it so far.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear Joy's opinion.
Okay.
And maybe it depends on like what people say about it. Like obviously if it's like, I don't know, if it's like bad
like what criteria? Like offensive, like it's using derogatory terms and stuff, like that's not acceptable. But also I feel like it was like how I was saying with In Our Mother's House, where I was happy that while the family was portrayed in a very positive light, it didn't ignore the fact that they had critique and that they had to deal with from the neighbors being homophobic. It's like, I think bringing to the surface some things that like might be hard to talk about. So like how there were people in that trailer for the show that were obviously being discriminatory. It's like, yes, it shows people being discriminatory against people with disabilities, but that's part of the life, and if we ignore that, then it's not going to get fixed.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh.
What I'm trying to think.
Oh, I have a thought. What Haley was saying a while back with people with physical or mental disabilities, only like 50 years ago would just be put into an asylum or an institution and be forgotten about. Um, that reminds me of a line from one of the articles we read for this week. It was about how the writer basically was saying how he thought that integrating people with disabilities into our society and into education is like one of the last frontiers of integration, which was really interesting because I never thought about it like that.
So is he saying like it's one of the like last steps to integrating?
I think like one of the last things that have come up to integrate.
But are you guys still here?
Mm-hmm.
One question I had is, what did you guys think about the fact that in that study, that I'm trying to remember, last name started with a B, but in that article we read, study, they found that most educators only brought like literature into the classroom that focused on a disability when they got a student that had that disability. So like if they found out that they were getting a student with autism, they would bring a book about autism.
But wait, what was your question?
What do we think about it?
So just like sort of what did you think about it?
I kind of like, well, yeah, like the statistics that like study found. I thought it was kind of surprising. I thought like the teachers like are like, oh yeah, well I'd find one if like a student of mine had it, but it's like, well, don't you want to teach your students beforehand? And like, and I'm just like, oh, like crap, I really should actually do it now. Like, I don't know, that was just kind of surprising to me.
Mm-hmm.
And like sad to see like there's that, like it's so little that you would find books like that.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised, but at the same time not surprised because like I know in other classes when we've talked about like teaching about like different cultures and stuff, like I would probably like teach about cultures first that were in my classroom or like in the school or something. Like I would focus on that first and then probably broaden out, but like it's impossible to like include every single type of culture during, the year you have with your kids. So like if like a new student came from a different culture that we hadn't talked about already, then I would of course like run and go get, a book or try to find resources or something about it. So like I could kind of see why teachers would do that, but it's also sad, like Kate was saying, that like it has to like be brought up into like the teacher's attention to be like, oh crap, like I need to, talk about this. But I can also understand why that happens. Like,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
that
Or
is
like
true.
the way that they don't really feel the need to teach about disabilities until they have someone who would sort of be like critical of the fact that they're not.
Mm-hmm. Do you know when that study was done? I forgot.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I was like, why did she just leave? I gotcha.
Okay. But yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. But I would hope because I feel like that study was it like 2005 or something like that, or am I coming with a different like random number?
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember.
I don't think it was very recent.
Yeah, so then maybe it was just kind of like we've kind of got, I feel like, more of this like momentum going where more and more books are out there.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe like 10 years ago that wasn't necessarily the case when around that study was like made. And so like like I don't know if it was harder and so it just was they didn't really do it because it wasn't as necessary, and now like more inclusion is being like pushed and like more books are coming out, something maybe that's like it's more like popular, or like I would hope that it's now something that more classes have already. But
That's a good point.
When you talk about books being more necessary, how would you probably, I'm trying to think, what disabilities do you think should be represented the most in books? Like, this might be sort of a tough question, or like, how would you judge which disabilities need to be represented the most? Like, because like Haley was saying, you can't educate on everything. You can't educate on every single culture. And so you sort of have to like, you look at the ones that are most prevalent in your school or something like that. But
I mean,
like,
I guess to like categorize, I'd probably do like autism or someone that was like nonverbal and use, because I've seen like in classrooms like someone who was nonverbal and used a communication like the device or whatever. And then I also think like if books come out that have students have behavioral disorder, like that's becoming more prevalent. And so I think like I would want to include, if there was a book out there, I'd want to include that as well. Like in my little sister's classroom, like there were several students that had behavioral disorders, or were on the autism spectrum. So I would try to, but then I would also like, I don't want to like have a student that maybe has something that I'm like ignorant about and don't have like necessarily a book about. But I think like those are like kind of the main ones that get attention, and like I'd almost want to challenge that in some way, and like,
yeah,
and that way, because it's like, or like with like culture, so it's like, well, these are the majorities in this area, but so I'm not gonna have a book about that. You may be this other, you may be part of a different culture, and I'm not like representing you, and like that would be unfair as well. So I don't know. It's kind of hard.
Maybe that could be a muddy question.
Yeah.
I like that.
Of how do you judge which disability needs to be represented? Because
if you have some,
go ahead.
Sorry. Like if you have someone in your class that has like a really rare disability, there might not even be a book out there about it. Like I feel like just books on like multicultural stuff, like especially disabilities, I feel like there's not that much out there on like the less common things. So
I don't know. More common things. I don't think that there's a lot out there. Like there's so many kids who have ADHD or ODD, and nobody talks. Like there's
no books on
it. Books on a kid who has ADHD or who's like sitting there and it's like I can't focus and.
So I guess like my question would be like, how could we support those students that don't necessarily have like this common disability or whatever, if that is the case, like how do we best support them like in our classroom literature or whatever? Like that's what I would want to know, because I have no idea.
Yeah. Or how do we support the most disabilities possible in our classroom?
Yeah. In literature.
Yeah. In literature. Does someone want to write that down? I have paper.
That's 32. You're back.
Yay! Woohoo! I got a frozen piece of meat from the freezer and just put my phone on it.
We were like, did Catherine just like leave and she didn't say anything like that? We're kind of like, what? That makes more sense though. Okay.
Yeah. If you're near your paper, we just got a muddy question.
What was that? You have there's another muddy question?
Yeah.
What is it?
Let's go at 33 minutes. How do you support the most disabilities possible in your classroom through literature? Because we were talking
to fill you in. Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about not having many books on a certain disability, but having a lot of students or even one student who has that disability and sort of wants to find something to use as a mirror.
We're kind of talking about like, well, what, like, types of disabilities would you like focus on to try to find literature about? Because like, you know, like autism and like behavior disorders are common, but then like how do you like, what if you have a student that kind of has a more of a rare disability or disorder, like how do you also support them as well? So
I think a good idea could be to just do a quick assessment of what your students know and what their prior conceptions are, and see what needs to be focused on more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, for sure. Have you guys like had any experiences with someone who has a disability? Like growing up or like in your family, anything like that?
We had a kid in my elementary school that I grew up with who had Asperger's syndrome. He didn't find out until like 5th grade. But yeah, it was a lot of kids. It was really easy for us to be mean to him because he was just different. And when he found out that he had Asperger's, we had like a whole class discussion about it, and he told us what it was and stuff. And like it was great, but then afterwards, like we were still mean to him, which is like which was kind of weird.
And Asperger's is hard because a lot of times you don't see it, and you might not even notice it through their presentation. You might just see that this person says things really randomly, or like, because sometimes they can say mean things or things that set people off just because they can't control their speech. And so that's a particularly difficult disability.
Mm-hmm.
And also, didn't so I know like Asperger's before was like considered its own disability, but isn't it now they like clumped it all together, so now it's just considered autism?
I think it's on the
it's on the spectrum. So it's like I think a few or whatever like on that autism.
I'm curious.
So it's like under the category autism, I think. I could be making this up. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I'm curious what kind of tools there are out there for teaching kids about this concept of this spectrum.
Because I've never even been taught about it, and I'm in my 3rd year of college almost. But I have not taken SPED yet, so I'll probably learn. But
I mean, I guess like all I would kind of know how to address it is from like the Including Samuel book, where it's like you kind of like address maybe like what they have sort of to your students, but like also just say like he's just like this. Sometimes she's just like, you know, does things a little bit differently or whatever, and like really just focus on like who they are rather than what disability they have. I don't know if we necessarily
or like
teach.
how Carly.
One thing I've noticed. Sorry, go ahead, Haley.
Or like how Carly compared like her what was it called? When you like block things out. Yeah, stemming. How she compared how she stems compared to like how we like I stem, or other people might do that as well. So like making connections to like make the kids like realize they're really similar different things. Like that's like it was like a realization for me as an adult. So like as a kid, that would make a lot of sense, I think. Like
that kind of connects to the article's list of qualifications when assessing books about disabilities, that they highlight similarities more than they do the differences.
One thing I've noticed with kids with disabilities, or anyone with disabilities, is letting them tell you about themselves. So, like, some people aren't always comfortable with it, but I've seen teachers of students with disabilities who will have this come up to the class and really just like answer questions so that people can learn from them. And a lot of people with disabilities appreciate that because people aren't assuming how they are or how to interact with them or things that they like.
Yeah, I'm curious because we talk a lot when we talk about like multicultural stuff. We talk a lot about, you know, not like always looking at the token, Asian person or the token Black person to speak for people like them. And so it's I'm interested in how that transfers to people with disabilities. Because yes, everyone is different. But like, are they okay with would they be okay if everywhere they went they were asked to talk about their disability?
Maybe.
I think it depends on the person.
Yeah, that's important to remember.
Yeah.
Like I have. Sorry, Nicole, are you talking? Like I have a friend who has. Oh my gosh, there's like a delay. Do you want to go?
Go ahead.
Okay. It like pauses and then you start talking as I start talking. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyway. So I have like a friend who she has like a hand deformity. So like one of her hands, like she only has like one kind of like full finger and the rest are kind of shorter. And she's like really open to talk about it, like addresses it and like super open. But I think there's also like the other people who are really shy about it, don't necessarily want to talk about it. So it's like, yes, I think in some cases you like there is that token person that talks about it, but I think it also like definitely depends on the person and like what they're comfortable with, and like I think depending on like their life experience too, and like what they feel passionate about telling you about it or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So could we turn that into like a big idea?
A muddy question?
Yes, or like like a muddy big idea.
Yeah, like sort of at 40 minutes. Where's the line between asking the token person with a disability to talk about their disability and allowing them to tell us more about it? And I think that sort of what I should have said earlier, instead of like having them come up and answer questions, is disabilities are really personal. So Catherine, how you were saying about culture, the culture is a very widespread thing, but a disability is something super personal that they get to, and there are things that they get to control about it. So like how people address them, there's like people that are in wheelchairs. One person in a wheelchair might want someone to not touch their wheelchair at all. Another person might be super okay with this. And so I think just asking the questions now and then of, how do you want me to do this? Are you okay with this? So that you're showing that you respect their choices.
For sure.
Yeah. Should we?
Yeah, at the Y, we like talked.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll just say this really quick. At the Y, we were like talking, one of the kids, we like come up with rules or whatever, and they're like, the golden rule, like treat others as you want to be treated. And then someone was like, let's treat others as they want to be treated.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Because like how I want to be treated could be different than how like Kate wants to be treated, or something like that. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah. It's a good one.
It's
a good classroom rule right there.
Yeah. Should we end this now?
Sure.
How many minutes?
Going.
Yeah. We're at 43 minutes right now.
Okay.
Does anyone have any final thoughts?
Yeah, that's fine.
No. I don't think so.
All right.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.